It's time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Property Podcast. It is episode 102. I'm still Rob B. With me is still Rob D. No, you can't get rid of us. We're here to stay. Good morning everyone. And good morning Rob.
Good morning, Rob. And no, you can't get rid of us that easily. We've got plenty more ideas for episodes, and we've got a couple coming up which are going to be really interesting because they're tackling some of the questions that we get asked all the time. And probably the most frequent we're tackling today. Where should I be investing? So today's episode is going to be about the best places to invest in 2015. So it's another of those episodes where we stick our necks out, and hopefully it's going to be an interesting one for you. Plenty more coming up as well, but we've got to start, Rob, by talking about the Property Tips book. We've just got to.
Yeah, we'll keep it brief, I promise, but it's just been incredible. So last week when we'd seen the initial launch, it just did brilliant things, the book. As we said, when it was free, it was the number one business book in the UK. Now it's paid, but it's at cost. It costs next to nothing. It's still doing very, very well. It's the number one property book currently. Number two in the whole of investing, only beaten by Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'm happy to come second to Rich Dad Poor Dad, Rob. I hope you are. It's done incredibly well. Over 60 reviews as we record this and counting. So thank you to everybody who's bought a copy. It costs just over £3. It's a coffee to buy. If you haven't got yourself a copy, what are you doing? Grab one. Everyone's been really positive so far. So I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it for £3. If you get one thing out of it, it was worth it. So go to thepropertyhub.net/tips book and get yourself a copy there.
Yes, do it. You will not regret it. Okay, moving on to our news story this week. The headline starts, landlords to blame. There's a surprise. What are landlords to blame for this week? Well, landlords...
We've done it again.
We have. This week, we are to blame for Britain's rising house prices. So this is the story that property rose by 2.1% in January, according to Rightmove, and Rightmove seem to be blaming landlords for it. Apparently, the problem is that supply is really, really low, and you don't have to be an economics genius to know that when supply is low, prices tend to go up. Apparently, the reason why this is happening and supply is so low is that so much of Britain's housing stock has been snapped up by investors who tend to hold on to property longer than a residential occupier would, and therefore nothing's coming onto the market. Therefore, people who want to put their property onto the market don't because they haven't got anywhere to move to, and so on and so on. So I can see why Rightmove have got a bee in their bonnet about this, because without any houses to sell, they haven't got much of a website. But I think blaming it on landlords, Rob, I think perhaps the chronic underinvestment in new housing stock for the last 10 years might have a role to play as well.
Yeah, I'm going to sit on the fence and be diplomatic here, but this is just a load of rubbish. The percentage of housing stock that's owned by landlords is minute in comparison to owner-occupiers. You would think that it was the majority of the housing stock in the UK was owned by landlords, the way this has gone on. And as you said, Rightmove, you think they'd have some interest in not peeing off landlords, as that's where half their business comes from, in the letting side. But, there is a housing crisis. There's no doubt about it. But we don't build enough properties. We've talked about this numerous times, and that's the issue here. Yes, landlords do have a percentage of the housing stock, but it is a very, very small percentage. It will go up, though, if the government, and that's any government, don't start building more homes. The problem is, as we pointed out before, though, that is easier said than done. Rightmove, yeah, it makes good headlines and it probably gets a lot of clicks. But in reality, is it based on any strong truths? No, not really. But I'm sure they'll get a lot of reads, and that's probably what they want.
Yep, so you can read that story. It was originally in the Telegraph, based on a Rightmove report. You can read that in the show notes, where you'll find all the other links that we talk about today. And this week, you'll find those show notes at thepropertyhub.net/bestplaces2015.
So leading into the best places to invest in 2015, we're going to start with a SpeakPipe message. You can leave these messages on the website, and Matt has left us a message this week.
Do you think the current value of houses in the UK, especially in South East and London, which are currently very, very overpriced, overvalued, you think that will carry on going up? Because historically, the value of houses tends to revert to 4 times approximately average salaries. So in London, you might have a average house price of about £500,000, meaning average salaries are about £125,000, which of course is not true. It's more like about £36,000 or £40,000 in London, and most of the South East and lots of England has the same out of kilter price versus average salary. What with the election and interest rates about to go up, and looking like we're in a bit of a bubble, and a 7-year sort of cycle coming to an end, do you really think that prices are just going to keep going up, or do you think this current cooling is just the beginning of another minor or major crash? See, as a first-time buyer, I'm rather reluctant to step on the ladder at the moment where things are incredibly overvalued.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Matt has some very strong views, particularly on London and the South East. He's very, very anti that property market and generally property on the whole. He is a first-time buyer investor, so probably that extra nerves and that extra reluctance to invest, because it is hard to do your first investment or your first purchase. So I do appreciate that. One point I will pick up on, though, yes, Rob and I aren't particularly pro-London, as you've probably guessed over past episodes, and you'll find out more this episode. However, using house prices to earnings ratio, it's commonly done in property. You hear lots of people talking about it. I feel it's a really, really poor indicator. And more importantly, an economist I recommend you all follow, he has a blog and he also commentates in the Times every Sunday, David Smith. I think he's one of the most accessible economists in terms of his writings. It's very easy to absorb. But one of the things he's pointed out in the past is that house prices to earnings ratio is a very, very poor indicator, because actually we should be looking at disposable income. So let me give you an example. In the 80s, house price to earnings ratios were quite low. It went as low as 2.5%, way below the average. So you could go, in the 80s it was 2.5 times income, and now it's over 4 times income. So prices compared to the 80s are now overvalued. Not true. And the reason why is actually disposable income is a better indicator, because in the 80s we had double-digit interest rates and double-digit inflation. It was actually a lot more expensive to purchase property and own a property in the 80s because the amount to service it through debt was so much more. Looking at that data, it suggests that 80s was a better time to buy, but actually it wasn't, because of affordability. So affordability is actually a far better indicator. When you hear people talking about house price ratios, remember not to read too much into it, whether they're putting a positive spin on it or a negative spin on it, because actually, as a data point to use, as a single data point to use anyway, it's not very effective. That's house prices to earnings ratios. Interesting point there. But Rob, the bigger point is, and this is what we're building this whole episode around, is where to invest. And you're going to start off with an official apology, I believe.
I feel like I've got a few apologies to make. We've got 100 shows there. All my past remarks have suddenly come back to haunt me all at once. So I got an email the other day from someone who lives near Burnley mentioning how I slagged off Burnley a while back. So yeah, sorry about that. And then, this is bad, I don't even remember doing this. Apparently I've slagged off Norwich in the past as well. And in the last week, I've separately, in Spain, met separate people from Norwich, who've been telling me how great it is and how it's the new Brighton and all this kind of thing. And I honestly don't even remember. I remember insulting Ipswich, but I don't remember insulting Norwich. Anyway, I need to semi-apologise, but at the same time, make a point which I think is relevant to this episode, which is that the reason that I wouldn't personally be investing in Norwich at the moment is that while I'm sure it's a wonderful place, the transport links really let it down. And the person I was talking to was saying this, how it's like to get there from London, it takes forever because there's no motorway. It takes you forever and you're stuck behind a tractor. Or you can get the train and it runs along forever, stopping everywhere. And the trains are from 30 years ago. And that is a real problem when it comes to property investing. So the fundamentals are something that we talk about all the time. And there's a reason for that, and it's because transport is really important, as are employment and schools and all that kind of thing. London obviously has fundamentals by the bucket load. It's an economic powerhouse, and that's great, but everyone knows that, and everyone wants to live in London. and therefore prices are absolutely nuts. And so while it's always dangerous to try and call the top of a market, and you could have done the same thing 10 years ago, there are reasons why we are not particularly pro-investing in London right now, because it feels like the growth opportunities are going to be elsewhere. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about where that elsewhere might be, but the fundamentals are always absolutely critical to think about, because London, great fundamentals, really expensive. Lots of other places in the UK, really cheap, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to want to invest there. You need to find somewhere that's more reasonably priced, where there's more growth potential, but the fundamentals are still there. And it's no surprise, Rob, given some of the things that we've talked about in the past, that the North, as kind of one big kind of nebulous umbrella phrase, the North, there are so many places there where the fundamentals are absolutely there and where prices haven't run away so crazily as they have done in London.
No, you're right. There's really going to be two key areas we're going to identify today. And the first one we have to start with is the North, because it's something we've talked about before, as Rob said, and it's something we'll talk about in the future, because prices haven't run away like other areas in London and close to London. Prices up until last year have actually been flat since 2008. And the first signs of movement began last year. And this is something we talked about at the beginning of last year. It's something we predicted. We got things wrong, hands up, we did. But one of the things we got right is predicting that the commuter belts would do well. And the what you call tier 1 commuter belts did very well. And the North would start to rise. And yeah, the North is a big place, so let's get specific. It's the place with the strongest fundamentals. And you won't be shocked by some of the places we'll tell you now, because you think fundamentals, North, so you're going to think of places like this. And yes, places like Manchester and Leeds are really the key hubs of the North that I personally, and I know many of listeners, and Rob will talk about his key areas shortly, but really believe are the strongest areas. They're the areas that have seen the growth first. There are other areas, and really they're not the only two places to invest, because what you've got then is all the commuter satellite towns around those places, which will benefit from it as well. And then you've got what I call, in property terms, not in greatness terms, tier 2 cities like Liverpool, Sheffield, Nottingham. Please, disclaimer, Liverpool is the best city, but I'm just talking about property. I got picked up on that as well, Rob. Someone told me off for not calling Liverpool tier 1. Liverpool, Nottingham, Sheffield and others will do very well also in the coming year or two. Don't get me wrong, this is not doubling overnight. This is growth and steady growth. It actually follows very, very closely the North to the 18-year property cycle. If you've not listened to those 2 episodes we've done on that, make sure you do. And I know Rob's got a great episode coming up on the Property Geek as well, covering the 18-year cycle. But the point is, the North very much has followed that. So follow the fundamentals. The strongest of the fundamentals lie in Manchester and Leeds. Then look at all the other major cities around those and the satellite towns. And as long as you look for all the fundamentals, not just 1 or 2, and focus in those areas, because the prices are good and the yields are good compared to the southeast, that really indicates there's an opportunity for growth there. And that's where we're personally investing right now.
Yeah, you could pretty much just look at anywhere north of Birmingham, and the way that the graphs have moved over the last 10, 15 years is completely different from the southeast. And that does create opportunities. It's really interesting because, again, getting back into the territory of places we've slagged off in the past, we were talking last summer about how we wouldn't personally invest in the Northeast. And I was having a conversation with someone about this as well, who said that the Northeast is a massive turnaround story waiting to happen, and how there's so much potential there. Everything is so undervalued. It's had so many problems, but at some point money's going to be poured into it. It's going to come back really strongly. It's because it's a great place. And I absolutely agree with that. It's just a question of timescales. Like, how long do you want to be waiting around for this to happen? So you've got that on one end of the scale, and then at the other, you've got cities which are already there, like your sort of Manchesters and your Leedses, where it might be harder to find value because they're already well established, because they're great cities and they're doing well. And so it's about kind of finding those places in the middle somewhere where everything's in place, where the affordability is good, where the yields are good, and where all the factors are there that you're going to be looking for as an investor. And it's not always easy to find, but I would say that the places that you've been talking about, Rob, are the kind of places that I'd be looking for that value. But of course, some people are going to want to be looking in the southeast, and quite rightly so. There are always going to be an investment case in the southeast, people wanting to invest there, either because the demand is so strong, for rental demand you're never going to be struggling, or because they might perceive the capital growth prospects to still be better, or just because it's closer to home and that's how they're comfortable investing. And so I don't think we can ignore it completely, because there are areas in the southeast that have done extremely well and which may continue to do so.
Absolutely. So the second area that we're quite positive on is what you would call outer commuter belt. So the commuter belt has done really well, and there's still value in certain places of the commuter belt. But the outer commuter belt hasn't really moved yet, and that ripple effect, so what affected the Tier 1, what we'll call Tier 1 commuter belt last year, so places under 30 minutes from London, what affected that last year will affect the outer commuter belt this year. So places more like 30 to 60 minutes outside of London. So still good transport links. Transport links alone aren't enough. You want all the fundamentals as well. So, for example, Luton may or may not move up next year because it's an area that needs a lot of investment. But there are other areas that are strong that are 30 to 60 minutes away that should do pretty well this year, at least we think, because it's just that natural ripple effect. So look out for those areas too. They're the two areas that, personally speaking, I'm most likely to invest in this year. I will look at other areas if the deal is particularly strong, but it has to be barnstorming for me to look elsewhere. I know, Rob, we have both invested elsewhere of what we've just described, in the last 12 months even, but we've got particularly strong deals. But the majority of stuff has been in the north, but we wouldn't rule out necessarily outer commuter belt. So look out for those Tier 2 commuter belt areas. But there could be, and possibly is, still value in Tier 1, because it's only just started growing. Yes, it's grown aggressively, but for a lot shorter time period than London. So, Rob, there's a few areas that you've been looking at and you're going to point out that you feel potentially could offer some value.
Well, I think it all depends on where you draw the boundaries, really. It feels like the commuter belt of London is just kind of getting bigger and bigger, and you've got places which are right on the periphery of the M25, which previously you would have considered to be miles out. But as that ripple effect has taken hold, things have got further away. So, I'm far from an expert in this because this isn't an area that I'm personally looking to invest in, so I've not been looking at any detail. But I've heard people talking about, for example, Sydenham potentially having strong growth because previously people were looking in Peckham, but now Peckham was up and coming, now is up and come, and so people are looking a little bit further out. Same for somewhere like Sutton, where maybe in the past it would have been somewhere like Morden, Mitcham, but now things are just kind of getting a little bit further down the road. And these are all places which have got strong transport links into town, they've got good road links, and for that reason, you're never going to struggle. These are always going to be places that are desirable for people to live. It's just a case of how the yield stacks up. And if you're trying to make an investment case, I think for the centre of town, from a yield perspective, it's just no way. It's kind of, you're purely speculating on capital growth. And then trying to make that yield case as you go further out has been progressively getting tougher and tougher. So you are getting further away from town, but there are still plenty of places where there is going to be value and they are going to do well. I think the key with any of these things is to always keep an eye on the yield, always keep an eye on the cash flow, and making sure that you don't just get swept up in sort of, things are going up and they'll always go up and therefore I need to get in on the boat now before it leaves. I think that's the key when it comes to any of these things. It's easier to get swept away in the southeast than it is elsewhere.
I agree. People do get seduced by capital growth and just invest on the basis that it will go up. But what if your timing's wrong? That's a worry. So don't just bank on capital growth. As Rob said, yield has to be there as well. And that's something we've discussed before. Yield plus fundamentals suggests potential for growth. So if you can find an area that has very strong fundamentals and has a respectable yield, then you could argue that that area is ripe for growth. It's not a guarantee, but it suggests that it should be there growth in the near future. Because if it's got strong fundamentals and still offers a good return, for me, that's a clear indicator of an area that I want to investigate further. But Rob, you can look at things like that, or you can let Waitrose do it all for you.
Yeah, as a final point, I was going to say, if you don't trust us, trust Waitrose, because they've probably poured hundreds of millions of pounds into doing their research, and I, for one, have not. I'll put a link in it to the show notes. It is not something to be taken all that seriously, but people do talk about the Waitrose effect, And there is something to be said for the fact that when sort of fairly high-end businesses start moving in, they're doing that for a reason, because they think there's a clientele who they can serve. And so you can go onto the Waitrose website and you can look at the store openings that they've got planned for 2015. And so maybe there are worse ways to actually be identifying areas that are up and coming. But that is absolutely not something to base a whole investment thesis around. It's just another like interesting little data source, because you don't want to be basing everything on that, but then you also don't want to be basing everything on us, because we've been right a lot, but we haven't been right about everything, and at some point we're going to be really, really wrong about something.
Nah, no, joking. No, it probably will at some point. It has to happen. If you're right 51% of the time, then you're doing better than most. If you can, that's how casinos stay in business, because they're right 51% or better at the time. Okay, so that's our main topic of the week. Into our resource of the week. Rob, we've done this before where we've given you resources to pick your business name. You've dug up a gem that gives you your business logo as well. So if you're looking to start your own business with oomph, is the website to look at?
It is, and it's a logo generation site, and there's a few of these out there, but the difference is this one's actually good. I've been playing around with it a bit, and all you have to do is you put in the name of your business and you put in a few keywords to describe it. So I put in the property podcast and I put in like audio, microphone, a few things like that, and it comes up with an absolute ton of logos which you can just scroll through in about 10 seconds. And they're actually really good. There's plenty in there which you could actually use. They're not as good as if you paid a proper designer serious amounts of money, but if you're looking for something quick just to get something off the ground, it's really pretty impressive. So you can just go on there, you can pick one you like, customize it a little bit, play around with the colours, and for £25 you can get that logo and use it wherever you want. So it's not something that I would use to base an entire corporate identity around, but I think if you're just trying to get a business off the ground quickly, or just do something as a little test to see if it's going to work, but you want a bit of credibility by having a decent logo, it's a really good option. I haven't seen a site that's this good in the past.
We had a good play around with it before we went on air, and yeah, some of the logos were really good. I mean, some of them were pants, but to get any that are good off those types of websites is unusual. So have a look and see if you're impressed, and if not, check out Fiverr.com, another resource that we've mentioned before. Again, though, that can be very hit and miss. What isn't hit and miss, though, are our podcast reviews, because they continue to come in and are 5 stars. And this week's by Podcast SFTW. And Podcast SFTW says, unmissable, 5 stars. I discovered the Property Podcast about a year ago, and I've taken Rob and Rob on my first day commute ever since. I've learned an incredible amount about property, but it's never felt like learning because it's presented in such a fun and light-hearted way. These guys clearly love what they do. They're a pleasure to listen to. Just one request. Can the show go daily? No, but you do have the Property Investment Tips podcast. You do have the Property Geek podcast. And soon, I promise, you'll have the Property News Radio podcast. So that's 4 a week, 4 podcasts. So I know you don't get Rob and Rob in all of them, but you do get a Rob. So there's 4 for you. So hopefully that will satisfy your appetite. But thank you very much for your review.
And if you want both of us, maybe you can just have 2 iPods on the go and listen to Property News Radio in one ear and Property Geek podcast in the other and see how that works. Actually, no, don't do that. It's a terrible idea. But thank you for that review. And you mentioned taking us on your Thursday commute. We should really apologise for the fact that for a couple of weeks we had some issues with the iTunes feed. So if you had been expecting to listen on a Thursday, you might have been disappointed because it was delaying our episodes for some reason. But our tech chaps have been looking into it and it's all sorted now. So it will be up every Thursday morning, 7 a.m. without fail. We've had the episode ready every time. We haven't been slacking, but iTunes was letting us down. But from now on, if you do like to have it downloaded for your trip to work, you should have that there for you every Thursday morning without fail.
Perfect. So next week, again, without fail, we'll deliver another episode. It's saving for a deposit. So another question we get asked quite a lot. Now, if you're an experienced investor, you may go, oh, well, I don't need to save for my first deposit. But actually, there'll be a lot to take away from this because it could be saving for your next deposit as well. So we're going to call it saving for your first deposit. But if you're finding, oh, well, I've got one property, but I want to get another, and that process is taking a while, next week's episode is for you.
Yes, indeed. But for now, thank you for joining us for the best places to invest in 2015. Do check out the show notes where you'll find links to everything we've talked about. That's thepropertyhub.net/bestplaces2015. But thank you so much for listening. We can't wait to join you again next Thursday. But until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.